when did you decide to become an artist, or under what circumstances, or what motivated you? Was there a particular instance or something like this that led you to think, oh, I could be an artist?
Well, I don't know if this is a very conventional path that I took, but when I was a teenager, I was really into alternative music. I was kind of a goth. I listened to The Cure, and obviously, as a consequence, I started reading Camus and all this kind of existential thing. And obviously, as a consequence, I developed this idea that life had no meaning. And so, as a result, I kind of got quite depressed, and instead of thinking life has no meaning, therefore I should end it, I decided just to dedicate my life to something that had no meaning as well, and so I became an artist. Because art has no meaning, basically. Which is something we can debate, but it's just a good conversation starter.
That leads me to bounce right forward to another question that normally I would have asked a bit later on in the interview, but that is there a relationship between the notion of negation, the notion of complete meaninglessness, and a very strong sense of humor?
Yeah, there are different types of humor. There's the humor, the toilet humor, the kind of American type of humor. Look at my bum, it's funny. There's also a drier sense of humor where you're not really sure when the joke starts and who's the object of who are we laughing at. So that is really kind of an open-ended situation where there's an interplay between who's and also there's an interplay between when to laugh and when to take someone seriously. I mean, I like to make jokes, but when you stop laughing, it's interesting also to have a little bit of substance that's left over from that. What you said also about, I think, what did you say? About taking away or removing?
Mm-hmm.
What did you say?
Negation.
Negation, yeah, that's it. I think negation is interesting, in many respects, because, it's quite a big part of my work, just taking away things. Because, firstly, I think there's an environment where you work right now, be it online or offline, where there's always this overwhelming quantity of stuff happening. There's advertising everywhere on the streets, and then there's all these adverts popping up on the internet. So there's all this stuff kind of happening, and instead of creating new things, it's interesting to take away things as a creative process, just to remove things, and that's a big part of what I do or don't do.
What you do, what does an artist do? What do you think for you, of course, would be the biggest task? You've talked about negation, talked about perhaps the nuance that humor can construct, leading to a kind of thoughtfulness. Do these things answer to the question, what can an artist do, or what can Ole Sorenson do?
Well, yeah, I just started talking about what you can do, what you can't do, and how humor or not humor can be a part of that. If I want to go back to this idea of not meaning anything, or I think also what an artist does initially, it has no meaning, but through repetition it becomes meaningful. So whatever you start with is actually almost an accessory to this idea of doing it all over again and again and again. And it's like if you're an American politician. If you tell a lie and you repeat it over and over again, it becomes some kind of the truth or something that people believe into. And that's basically what I do.
Meaning, let's touch on meaning for a moment. We've talked about meaninglessness, Camus, existentialism in some of its traits. But meaning, the search for meaning, is often seen as what an artist is supposed to be doing, I guess. People always ask, what's the meaning of your work? Or
Yeah.
how do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, the meaning, there's different types of meanings, you know. Obviously, it's quite important if you're driving along the street and then you see a street sign, you gotta know what the sign means. You know, this is a kind of meaning that is vital and very important for, you know, not crashing into things or whatever. So that's not the kind of question you want to ask to an artist, because, you know, it's perhaps more subtle, or maybe, you know, I don't know what the thing means, or maybe it means something else to some curator or collector, or, you know, just someone in an exhibition venue, right? That's what I mean is one thing, and but I'm not a sole proprietor of that meaning. So I'm also you know, the viewer of my own work, and the viewer is not necessarily the same person virtually as the creator. So when I do something, maybe I'm in a state of mind, and then when I look at it after, I might be in another state of mind, and it's kind of a dialogue between the two. So what I'm happy doing is not necessarily what I'm happy to look at, and so maybe something really boring to do becomes something really pleasant to look at, and vice versa. So yeah, it's kind of a balance between the two.
That brings to my mind Roland Barthes' idea of the obtuse as the third level of meaning, the place where art actually resides. Would that notion of the obtuse, that notion of, as you were, I think, describing it, moving from one boring thing to another boring thing and finding that to be exciting, would that more or less operate in the arena that you imagine?
You know, I'm not. You know, I know what I know about Bart might not be the same as what you know about. I mean, you know, I'm familiar with Bart, the fan of wrestling, and that's kind of an aspect that I find interesting. But for my sake, you know, I get a lot of, you know, description of my work through analogies, and a good analogy for me is music, popular music, and you know, if you just to continue from what I was saying before about boredom and not boredom, is that you know, if you look at music, you know, like jazz music, I mean, from my perspective, jazz music must be really interesting to play, but it's not that interesting to listen to. You know, it's quite floral and all these kind of things. So it looks complicated, but it doesn't appeal to me. Whereas if you look at techno music, for example, you know, if you look at a DJ doing stuff, that kind of thing, that's pretty, for me, low in terms of labor. It's not that difficult to do, but it's really quite rewarding to listen to, I find, you know, in my own perspective and taste. So yeah, that's kind of a very complex way to not answer your question, I suppose.
Well, maybe I can make things simpler from another perspective,
Yes,
which is what would constitute your core interest, which is a version of what we've been talking about, of course. But you have described yourself as a remix artist. Do you want to pursue that a little bit for us to understand?
Yeah, I think it carries on with what I was saying earlier, that you know, there's this realization at one point where you've got all this stuff, you know, got you go to a shop and then you can consume so much, and you go online and you can look at images from all over the world, and so there's really a kind of an overflow of content. And as a creator myself, I thought that there was kind of a less of a motivation. That was my reaction to create new things, because there's just so much already there. And so instead of doing that, this interest for remixing came about, where instead of I thought there was much more of a need to organize these things together, rather than contribute to just add even more of the new, of the abundance that's already there. So again, my analogy is with music, whereas a DJ might not be making. Some DJs do make music, but what I think is more relevant for today, in terms of as a social phenomenon, is to organize this music in a sequence that might make sense, to an audience. So this is what I try to do in an artistic way, in a visual, as a visual response to this environment, which is already saturated with images.
We're in the studio, and we're talking in front of a work that you have up in the studio at the moment. And a very obvious aspect of that work is its play with technology. And I wonder if you would talk to the question of the processes that you involve in the making of the work.
Yeah.
Perhaps this work, if you'd like to talk about it.
Of course. Yeah, we're there, so might as well talk about it. This work is called Video Pistoletto. So these are stills from screens that are broken. Initially, this again is a gesture that I borrowed from an artist from the Arte Povera movement called Michelangelo Pistoletto. And so what he's done is, he's a very famous established person. So I borrowed his gesture from a recent performance series where he breaks very large mirrors. And so his vocabulary is very much associated with mirrors. So the breaking of something, but the breaking of, I applied that to another material, which is more of a technological material, which is the video screen. So, and more particularly in this case, is LCD screens. LCD means liquid crystal display. So when you break the surface of these screens, the liquid crystals behind the glass surface more or less loses the place. It gets displaced from its original pixelated. I'm just going to come back to that. So when you break the glass surface, the liquid crystals behind, they run across the broken glass and make these very organic patterns. And so there's a first gesture to use somebody else's vocabulary, so a performative vocabulary that's been applied to another material, and then from that point, well, you develop your own vocabulary, let's say, and that's kind of moves along this idea of remixing, but I think it's more of an expanded version of remix. It's not necessarily a common understanding of remix, where it's more associated with DJ culture and all that. You
mentioned Pistoletto. I'm curious about what part art history plays in your thinking. The history of artists, senior artists or artists in the past, and I wonder to what extent there's a specific interest in the context of art history, or whether the remixing, if we can call it that, is a question of plucking artists out of art history and removing them from art history perhaps, and deploying them, much as a DJ would deploy a section of music from an LP. Whether this is in fact rather more the interest we have in art history.
Yeah, there are several interests. What I really like about art history, if you look at a more of a macroscopic view or more of a wider view, there's this constant movement between, let's say, expressionism, conceptual, relational, technological. So it's just moving around all the time. There's this constant flux. So it's a bit like fashion. 1 year is short skirts, the other year is long skirts, short skirts, long skirts. But it's like a bit like a pendulum. So you can pay attention to the length of the skirts, but you can also pay attention to this movement, this pendulum movement, and this is what I think is more attractive to me. This idea of flow, of fluctuation, oscillation, and going from back and forth from one aspect to another. So this is the kind of thing that from very early on, I think fascinated me much more than one object or another. And so from that point, I really got into this idea of this one thing that I really enjoy about art history and about making art, and that one thing is variety. You see, so and if you talk about this one thing that is really specific to my work, is a non-specificity in a way. So everyone's just really kind of working hard to have this one trade within their work, and then my one trade is to be the jack of all trades.
I love your image of the long skirt, short skirt, the movement between them, which brings to mind a kind of sensuality, actually, of the swish of the skirt, you might say. I wonder to what extent, well, it brings to mind two things: the swish of the skirt, which is a very sensual experience, of course, for anybody, but also the question of the sublime, which is this question of movement, nothing static, but always, in a sense, becoming.
Yeah.
Would these two concepts be relevant to your work?
Oh yeah. Again, this is the one constant thing is the non-constant. It's the one thing that's not moving is movement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's maybe a little bit poetic, if you want to call it that way, or kind of arrogant. It depends on where you stand. But I'm very much an advocate against this more of a modern aspect of starting from scratch. It's much more. It's not about breaking. I mean, in this case, it's breaking the surface, a glass surface or a mirror. But in terms of what Pistoletto has done and what I've done, it's a continuous thing. And if you think about what, let's say, a pre-modern artist, before the Industrial Revolution, there's quite a lot of continuation, this idea of mimesis and this idea of taking on what other artists have done, what other strategies have done so, and then incrementally do these things. So you can apply that with a different flavor, of course, with taking into account, globalization and other socio-economic phenomena that is specific to today. I think there's some interesting links that you can make, and those links I think are more interesting to me than the actual breaks from one period to the other.
Let's talk about the contemporary period then.
Yeah.
It's been suggested that you're fascinated by the wealth of online content and that this promotes practices of sampling and sharing. Would that adequately represent for you the zeitgeist that we enjoy at the moment?
I'm trying to. It's really difficult for me. I mean, if you're looking, you know, at let's say, my mind is racing right now. If you try to put that into a post-colonial type of setting where you're saying is that the zeitgeist, you know, if I'm asked this question taking into account a post-colonial world, I can't answer it because then you're asking, you know, what's the universal idea setting in motion, you know, a society, and there's a lot of societies and there's a lot of peoples that have different agendas, that have different, you know, there's a power structure and all that kind of thing. So yes, there is I think there are little zeitgeists, you know, they're you know, I mean, I said I'm quite a fan of art, not just history, but, you know, contemporary art, and I go to a lot of art fairs, and you know, my wife is subscribed to many magazines, you know, Art Monthly and Art Forum and Freeze, all that kind of thing. So you can see little, you know, trends in those things. You know, one year everyone was doing mirrors, and then the other one, a year after that, everyone was doing a chain link fence. It's like all these works with fences. You know, how was that all about? It's true, you know, and so and a lot, you know, I went to an art fair the other year where a lot of people were using like utensils. So you've got this kind of trend, and so you can ask the question: is that to do with the artist, or is that to do with the consumers of art? You know, the collectors, the curators. Okay, this is something kind of new. We want to, you know, put there, and then maybe move some more products. You know, so the market is interesting to pay attention to that as well.
With the current technologies, just to pursue this a little further, with the current technologies that we have, I think it's been suggested by Harry Smith in What is Contemporary Art, that what seems most specifically contemporary or contemporaneous is the sense of everything all at once, that the whole universe, you might say, has been collapsed, and the time and space have been remixed and collapsed together in very interesting ways, of course. But that nonetheless, that would seem to be what we're experiencing, particularly with the fact that the cell phone is now ubiquitous across the world, even in small villages in Africa. So that there's a sense that the boundaries of space and time that were normally understood before no longer actually are relevant. Do you feel that's the case?
No, not at all. No. You might have the same technology, but you might not use it the same way. If you go to Brazil, they have different uses of cell phones, and they still they use their cell phone half of the time, and the other half of the time they have little CB receivers for you know, short distance communications, and this is just universal. And you know, if you go to Cuba, you know, this idea of remixing is applied to in a whole other way. You know, they taking a little electric motor from an electric fan and then use it in a pocket dishwashing machine and all that kind of thing. You know, this idea of remixing is applied to material culture in a way. You know, what you have and what you do with it, and how can you provoke a détournement in a way that, you know, the initial use, the prescribed use of at the point of sale of this product is completely altered after the point of consumption. So the consumer actually becomes some form of producer, and that's interesting for me. And it really gets under my skin when somebody asks me the question, not specifically you, but when somebody asks me the question, how has technology changed, the social, how has technology changed society? And nobody tries to ask the same question, but in reverse. How has society changed technology? And you can say that actually, I'm sure an equal amount of change has happened in that direction. If you think about how the internet was emerged, it was very much a concerted effort during the Cold War to have a information system that was decentralized, and that was funded by the American military, and eventually academia got hold of it, and then it trickled down, for lack of a better description, and into the consumer world, and etc. So that's part of the story. It isn't told often enough, I find.
Very good point. Is there some agency that you would see as operational in this reverse movement from the social to the technology that would lie above or below the level of the advances in technology itself? Would I don't know, the concept of, well, name a ideology, democracy, would that the increasing sense that people should have some kind of operational agency of their own life be one of those movements?
I think it's not in absolute terms. I'm just an artist, right? I do this kind of work, and so I'm not, some kind of clairvoyant. So my answer, I'm just forewarning you, doesn't make it true.
But it's your answer.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm not a politician, which is interesting, and it goes back to this idea of meaning, and I have this voice, but I can't back it up with any power. You know what I mean? I'm not an elected official. I'm not some kind of.
Nor can Trump.
Huh?
Nor can Trump.
Exactly. So I'm not a royalty or anything. So what I say has a limited impact on the society, and the society also has a responsibility to take it or leave it in a way, and I'm not enforcing that onto whoever, right? And so maybe technology has a similar aspect, than the agency of people's would be to take it or leave it in a way. As a consumer, you can buy into that or not.
In the book titled "How Can I Say What I Mean? How Can I Mean What I Say?" There's a sense that I think might be relevant to the current moment, that meaning has to be interrogated, that we don't actually know what meaning is. And if we talk, as you have talked, about negation from an existential point of view, I wonder if that sense of negation, that sense that meaning is too difficult to really understand, that this in fact is relevant to contemporary culture, that there is, in a sense, a kind of surrender the concept of meaning. However much we might say, what does it mean? We don't actually think that it's going to mean anything. Do you think that's true?
Probably going to be very eloquent in not answering your question again in the following way. I think meaning is not it's not only up to me to make the meaning of, if I'm talking about the work that I do, maybe I'm not a very good artist, and I mean something and I actually can't express it, so there's this idea of execution. So so maybe I'm not able to say what I mean. Also, I could possibly be in the wrong context. You know, I'm ahead of my time and I'm a genius, and therefore you're not ready to understand what I mean. Or I'm, you know, inversely a little bit too late. So, yeah, we know what you mean, but this is in passé, or you know, this is of another epoch, and maybe it'll come back because fashion always comes back, and then art maybe comes back in that way as well. So, yeah, I think I don't really know what you mean.
Touche. Well, I'm thinking that, well, maybe I can ask this question. When you look at other artists' work, which is a very different experience than looking at one's own, of course.
Can I interrupt? I just wanted to conclude, and I think this is an important aspect I forgot to say just one minute ago, is that, you know, meaning is a collective enterprise, right? You know, I can initiate the object to look at, for example, and if it works or if it doesn't work, is in terms of meaning, in terms of its purpose, all of that is not only up to me. It's, you know, like there's a certain number of institution, you know, an audience or whatever, and if it succeeds in, you know, becoming part of a zeitgeist or creating a zeitgeist even, is you know, there's a lot more actors that need to get involved, and so I'm not kind of all powerful. Well, this is what I mean, and you're going to kind of eat it all up. You know, there needs to be a vindication on a you know, on the social level, on the macroscopic level.
So when you look at other people's work, other artists' work, what do you look for?
You know, it's really funny because I'm an artist myself, and there's this selfish knee-jerk, if you pardon the expression, there's this kind of a selfish thing. I know I really like something when I say to myself, I wish I did that, you know, or I'm also when it's time-based work, when I'm in the moment of experiencing the work, I've got this kind of a fraction of a delay in my brain where I'm imagining I'm doing the work. You see? So if I'm listening to a play and the play is really good, I'll kind of project myself in the position of the main actor or something like that. So you know, it's so what I look for is something, I guess, I identify to on a very personal, on a first person level even. In me is imagining that I'm actually doing what I'm experiencing. So this kind of a fantasy that goes into the experience. And maybe that's where the remix comes along as well, in a way. You know, all the work that I've sampled and that I've appropriated is work that I really, really like. I've never sampled anything that I didn't like, really. So I think the idea of remixing is almost an extension of that fantasy in a way. So instead of kind of only imagining and that I did that, in a way I'm participating in this doing by continuing the making of that thing. You know, when you're in a concert and then, you know, you're listening to an incredible piece of music, what do? You applaud. You know, so you're participating. You know, maybe creating it is another way to applaud something, but by making another work from what you just experienced.
Which suggests to me that when you move from one body of work to another, that what is the trajectory, what guides the trajectory is respect for a given artwork. And so the movement has to do with a form of shifting respect or
Homage. Eulogy. Yeah, sometimes, but that can take various forms, and you can be so if you put it on its head, it's not necessarily respectful, but you you give you shed light upon it, you give it attention, and that's contributes to making that original art that you've appropriated even more part of a certain historical milestone.
we're in a studio.
Yeah.
And so I guess to that extent we could imagine that you're, as they often say, studio artist. But there is, in so many respects, in this last several decades, a retreat from the studio as a practice into, I guess we could, for want of a better term, call it project-oriented work, or as it's also been known, post-studio practices. What's your perception of that, or what relationship do you feel towards that movement?
Well, I think it makes sense, to not always have a studio when you don't need one. If you're a sculptor, sometimes the studio ends up becoming a storage space because you're doing really big things, and materially they need to be somewhere. If you're working with immaterial materials that can be stored on a hard drive, if your work is contingent on more the exhibition space than the actual process of getting it done. If you know what you're doing, in a way, I'm not trying to be facetious there, but if you know what you're doing in the studio, you don't need the studio as a place to experiment. Maybe I know for me, if I have a very big project, I'll just rent a space for the time of that production. But when I'm not doing that, why should I pay the rent for such a big space if I'm not doing anything in that space for 9 months? That's not efficient in terms of business. So I think it's I'm not rich, so I've got to think about these things.
Very true. And coming to that, being an artist is also a major financial transaction. Hopefully, it's a transaction, and the question of a career, that is to say, operating as a professional artist at whatever in whatever manner, requires a lot of attention and a lot of commitment, and I guess we could even say perseverance, since it can also have ramifications for the larger life of an artist, the domestic sphere, for instance. What are your thoughts about, in the experience you've had today, at any rate, what are your thoughts about the difficulties of actually operating as a professional artist?
Well, I don't. I think a lot of discussions I've had, with my peers is about, this idea of sacrifice. You gotta sacrifice some of your either time in the studio to make a living, because that's not necessarily where the money is coming from, or vice versa. You want to, sacrifice, family time for trade that for having a wildly successful you know, so maybe you want to opt for, you know, kind of a medium-sized career in a way. The way I've kind of treated it is, you know, I kind of looked at, you know, the big things, the big holes where people put all their money in it, and you know, it kind of disappears. There are two big holes, you know, there's the house and then there's the car. And I've not had a car, I've never had a car in my life. Well, I had it once when my dad gave one to me, and that was about 3 months, and I gave it up because it was just spending all my money, and I had to repair it twice in 3 months. So, and then a house, you know, with all the school taxes and all that. So other than that, I've not, you know, saving from that has enabled me to work less on the money things, and then, you know, spend more time traveling and doing things I like.
Do you read fiction?
I was reading science fiction for a long time, but then I just got into reading stuff, you know, all my wife's art magazines. That's what I read at the moment. But I read a lot of theory. Yeah, I read about, you know, these big names, and then continental philosophy, object-oriented ontology, the idea of the object, twisted versions of existentialism like Heidegger and things like that. But I like things that are difficult a little bit to read, that challenged me. I don't read so much for entertainment. I like to do other things for entertainment. Reading is more yeah, it's more of a, I'm tempted to say like work, but it's not really, but it feels like work in terms of effort, but it's a pleasurable effort. It's like going to the gym. I like going to the gym because it makes me strong, and my brain is the same. I like to exercise my brain.
Exercising the brain is perhaps one of the fundamentals to critical inquiry. I have to ask you what your thoughts are on the realm of the critic and the extent to which critical inquiry surfaces in the realm of art criticism.
You're talking about the art critic?
Let's talk about the art critic.
I think the art critic is part of what I was talking about earlier in terms of I'm not the sole proprietor of meaning. I'm not the only generator of the importance of my work or, you know, other works or Zeitgeist or whatever, right? So it's a team effort, let's say. So the critic is, you know, is interesting. I mean, you know, but if I keep it closer to me, I mean, the press agent is really important. The gallery person is really important. All these people are saving me work, you know. There's this reflex right now. You know, you could possibly, you know, you have an app for everything now. You can have an app for, you know, curating or whatever, I'm sure. So, you know, there's this kind of illusion that's created that you can do everything yourself, and that might be true. You can, in terms of possibility, but would you? You know, I don't know. I agree to that. You know, I like people. You know, I like and I like to give away control. Strangely enough, you know, people like to keep things in control, but I like to give away control. There's a lot of times where, you know, I don't think I've stolen any ideas, but a lot of people gave me ideas. You should, you know, what should I do? You know, I go and then someone, you know, comes in my studio and say, yeah, you should do that. And I thought, oh yeah, that's a pretty good idea. And it's not like I'm stealing because, you know, the guy's a chef or, you know, race car driving, I don't know. They're not going to become a famous artist tomorrow, so it's not any use for them. And I might have an idea, you know, for escargot for this chef friend, and I'm not gonna use it, so I give it to them. So the sharing is that, you know, for me, sharing of labor in terms of effort. So if someone wants to take 50% of my profit for, you know, doing all this stuff, well, you know, it's all right, because I wouldn't sell it anyway if I didn't hand over that 50%.
The art system. It's a grand term, and I'm not sure if we can decide what the art system is like. But every artist has a very specific relationship to the art system, or another word for that is the art scene.
Yeah.
So just with respect to your own expectations, Ollie, what's your sense of the art scene or the art systems that exist in Canada, most specifically, but internationally as well? You've worked in London. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about your experience of the art scene or the art system as it exists in both these places.
That's a big question. What's that? Sometimes. Oh yeah, that's a mouthful. No. Anyway, there's an expression to say like it's a big question. Can't remember. Again, I'm not. Just because I'm an artist doesn't make me this guy that knows how to fix things and has a clear view to everything. You know, I'm in my studio when I do stuff, and I'm not analyzing the state of the arts in Canada. But judging from, you know, the magazines that come out of Canada, I mean, there's a lot of landscape things. There's a lot of, you know, I mean, if you go to art fair, like Toronto Art Fair, there's a lot of things that I'm not really interested in so much. And I don't know, maybe I'll get into trouble by saying that, but it seems to be a lot of following and not a lot of leading, as that, you know, especially in terms of market. You know, a lot of people do stuff, but it's kind of offshoot from what you see in maybe other markets. But is that a trend as well? You know, there's a lot, you know, if you look into, you know, what's happening with China, there's a lot of knockoff, you know, there's a knockoff economy. So I suppose in Canada there might be an art knockoff economy in terms of what is interesting for art collectors. They wouldn't want to get things that are too out there or innovative, and oh, I've seen this in Berlin, maybe this Canadian art. So yeah, so this is kind of my 2 seconds of being kind of a, you know, what's it called when you're a grumpy old man? Yeah, this is kind of the stuff that's coming. I'm turning into a grumpy person, but that's kind of on a more global, a bigger scale. You know, and how I stay optimistic is to look at the smaller scale. There's always 1 or 2 people. If you go, you know, to an art fair or meet people, there's always, you know, some people. But my experience, they tend to be underdogs more than, you know, people that the big names. You know, that if you ask me who are the Jeff Koons of Canada, they'll probably be really boring people, like Jeff Koon is, really.
I'm reminded that I read someplace that Picasso once said way back when that there were 5 people in Paris that liked his work. So perhaps the scrutiny, the specific scrutiny, is more interesting than the larger picture. But do you think that experience of knockoff, I like the concept, is in fact an international scene? It's not just a Canadian one.
Yeah, you know, if you look at an art history book about, like you say, you know, in the times of Picasso, and you look, every page is amazing, obviously, because there's been a filtering process. All the bad work has been forgotten about, and if when you live in the present, the bad work is still around. So it gives you the impression that that's the only thing that's around. So you gotta be really good at deciphering these things and filter out the things. But again, you know, the DJ in me, the remix guy, is quite, I think, well rehearsed at this filtering process, and this idea of picking and choosing, in a way, becomes an art form for me, and almost a passion. And so again, there are two things I'm saying. On the surface, there's a lot of weird and things, and again, I might be wrong. You know, maybe I'm the one that's wrong. But I think the other thing I wanted to say was that if you look a little bit more, you always find really interesting work. Having said that, yes, there's bad work everywhere, not just in Canada. This it's called Fontana Mashup.
Fontana Mashup.
Mashup, yeah.
And it was from last year, was it?
It was
This
June
year.
this year.
Oh yeah, 2016.
Exhibition was this year.
Right.
So it's very recent. So, what you were talking about earlier about the art scene, and what's interesting about the art scene right now is that it's diversifying. If you look at the bigger art galleries, what's happening is that they're branching out. They're making franchises. You know, Gagosian has franchises in Hong Kong. In White Cube has a branch in Sao Paulo in Brazil. So you got the BRICS countries that are kind of slowly emerging. BRICS meaning Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This kind of emerging markets, and also Gulf states. So you got Qatar, Arab Emirates. So these are kind of emerging markets, and with emerging markets, you also have emerging tastes. So again, let's call it the post-colonial world or post-colonial art scene, let's say, where there's a little bit more of a voice that can creep in from other sources than the usual Western narratives that maybe some of us are getting bored with. And so how Canada can take that upon it, I don't really know. I know there's a lot of Chinese money coming in, so how is that can impact the art scene in Canada? I'm very enthusiastic about it, actually.
I want to shift over to a work that's behind you as we talk, Owen. I wonder if you would speak to that particular practice, I guess, but that particular body of work. And it's, as you have mentioned, called Fontana Mashup. Do you want to talk to the work and perhaps describe a little bit, because we have the image, but we don't necessarily have the performance. And perhaps you could talk about that in terms of this remix.
Of course. Well, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows what a mashup is. I mean, a mashup is a term that is used most often today anyway to identify a piece of music. Normally, it's quite often music mashup, where you have the instrumental version of one track and mixed with the a cappella version, so voice only, of another track. So the background music is from one artist, and then the vocal is from another artist. So that's quite, that's been used quite often to describe that practice, the mashup. What I've used mashup here is also between two other artists that have been appropriated, it's sampled. And this is from obviously Lucio Fontana, is another arte povera artist, and a rehashing of the practice of a German artist called photographer called Michael Wolf, and what he's done is he's gone to China, and he's almost as a ethnographer, taking pictures in a village called Dafen, which is specialized in doing handmade reproductions of masterpieces of Western masterpieces, handmade oil on canvas, and then his view on it is really pretends to be ethnographic, but it's borderline exploitative if you look into detail, which is kind of a critique of that in a way for me. The initial motivation to do this work. Obviously, Fontana is a artist from the arte povera movement. Arte povera means poor art, literally. So if you work with the gesture of an arte povera artist, and then you apply it to another material, and that material happens to be, the top-selling masterpieces that have performed the best in the auctions, record-breaking sales, and so this kind of dialogue between, something that means very poor and another thing that means very rich. So this kind of a dialogue. So you're putting one on top of the other, like a mashup, really. I've done this very recently, so I can talk about it for a long time because, I'm so ingrained into it. I work with it almost on a daily basis, still today. This, new facets come up and new ways to talk about it. But you can also talk about it in terms of copy. It's a handmade copy. It's not a mechanical reproduction. So if you look at it in a Walter Benjamin type of perspective, the aura of the artist, the original artist, is transmitted in the copy. It's not a mechanical reproduction. It's a handmade reproduction. All these aspects are very controversial. And then again, what I'm talking about, this knockoff economy that's happening on a larger scale and on a global scale. Knockoff computers, knockoff clothes, Gap clothes made for cheap in China or other parts of the world like Bangladesh or wherever. So this is what is interesting. You get an opportunity to do a piece of art for me that's really you can't really reduce it to talking about it in 1 or 2 minutes. I can't explain it, I can't exhaust it by talking about it in this very short interview, and this is really fun for me because I've made a piece of art that's kind of almost irreducible to a speech or kind of a, let's say, what do you call it? A soundbite. Yeah, I've made a piece of work which is for me that's the indication of a successful piece of work because I can't reduce it to a soundbite.
The work brings up a thought about the collector. You've talked about the auction and how significant that is in this particular work as a kind of dialectic. But just very quickly, what would be your ideal collector? What's your concept of the collector, irrespective of, I guess, the auction scene, which is really perhaps more the market and investment? Apart from that, what would be your ideal
Well, you just discredited the collector, because that's part of what the collector is. You know, apart from um, apart from walking, what's the role of shoes? Yeah, that's a big. You're just taking away so much. No, the collector is vindicating the work by consuming the work for me, and but the previous series I've done with the Pistoletto, video Pistoletto, I think it's much more um, um, addresses that idea, because I'm using video monitors that I'm breaking, and those, by breaking the work, they become art. And so by making it dysfunctional, I'm making art, and when I'm breaking them, then they're not useful anymore. So therefore, you know, it's not useful. That's the role of being of an artwork. An artwork is not meant to be useful. So because it's useless, it's becoming art. But it's useless, so you have to dispose of it. So because it's obsolete, the way I'm just accelerating this race towards obsolescence in a way, by just making it into a work of art. And so for me, the greatest moment would be to, instead of throwing it in the garbage, just giving it to, or selling it to a collector. So that's my work. So in a way, yes, I'm, you know, metaphorically, you know, comparing the collector with the garbage collector that way. But again, if you can go past that, that would be the ultimate goal.
There's been an erosion of the notion of originality over the last several decades, and we've talked, not necessarily to that specific question, but we have talked around this question of the remix and such. And I wonder, would it be fair to say, Oli, that on the question of originality, or what some people call the authentic, that you in fact would be in the business of subverting the preconceptions of originality and identity? That in fact it's the subversion of the notion of originality that lies at the heart of your work.
Yeah, I've got a few things to say about that. Also, I've got a few things to say about that. And one is, I really get upset when people confuse the idea of originality with authenticity. They don't always go together. You can do something authentic, or you can perpetuate even something authentic without it being original, and vice versa. Okay, and so Nelson Goodman talks about two different types of authenticity. There's the autographic authenticity and the allographic authenticity. Autographic is the one that we talk about most often. If I make drips on my canvas, these drips kind of are almost the mistake that end up becoming the signature of my work, because that's what I do all the time. So if I want to recognize a Sorenson, I'm going to look for those mistakes, I'm going to look for these things. Allographic is more to do with copy culture, where if in music again, if I copy a composition by a sonata, let's say by Mozart or whatever, and I've copied all the notes correctly, it's not my work, it's another copy of Mozart. So the authenticity carries on. The authenticity of Mozart carries on with my copy, So if I copy somebody else's stuff, you may ask, how is it authentic to me? Or you can also ask, how is it authentic to the artist that I'm copying? And that has a lot to do, it comes back, we can go back into, anthropology, and talk about copy culture in traditional societies, this idea of oral traditions and, things that are carried on, and continuing from different generations, and this for me doesn't make it less authentic, doesn't make it less of a thing to pursue. Let's say when you say it's not authentic nowadays, it's almost like saying it's not of no value, and that, you know, and another word I really hate is innovation. You know, if it's new, then it must be good. That's not necessarily the case. Maybe I'm getting grumpy again, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure if I answered the question. Was there something left in there that I haven't addressed?
Do you subvert preconceptions of identity or originality?
Yeah, yes. Again, I go back to, you know, my original statement in comparing, you know, my work with the work of a DJ. You know, there's one thing to be original in terms of creating the music, but there's also this idea of creating an original mix, an original combination of elements that are not original. So there are different levels of originality. You can be original with a material that is already cultural, that's already attributed to other authors. So it's not original that way, but it's original in the way it's laid out